G'day, ZiggyD here, and today I want to take a bit of time to talk about account-bound items, drop rates, and gambling in Reaper of Souls. There's a big sort of shift in the entire build, or the entire structure, or the entire theming of the itemization and drop rate system in Reaper of Souls, in line with sort of a shifting, I guess, agenda behind how they want the game to be. Blizzard in the past have always been, not afraid to sort of create their own spin on genres. They sort of were responsible very much so for pioneering how a lot of modern MMOs are now, and they obviously pioneered the action RPG genre as well with Diablo 1 and Diablo 2. And with Diablo 3, they kind of seem like they want to forge a little bit of a different direction again. So, making Diablo 3 a bit of a different game. There's still Diablo 2 there, and that sort of fits that classic action RPG role there. And with Diablo 3, kind of moving to a different sort of modern action RPG that Blizzard wants. But we'll sort of leave that alone for now, and we'll see how the changes they make sort of work into that, and maybe I'll talk about that a bit more in the future. But first, let's talk about the itemization system, the drop rate system, and the gambling system, and all that jazz. But before we get into that, we can't really talk about that without considering the fact that most items in Reaper of Souls now are account bound. So in Reaper of Souls, there's a big shift towards not only the removal of the auction house, which will be happening just before the game releases, I believe, but also the account binding of pretty much all items of value. Now, there are some specific sort of smaller things that aren't account bound, and I believe you'll be able to trade some little things, but the essential effect is that there's no far-reaching trade economy. There's no way of obtaining specific items outside of drops and gambling. So, I have my own sort of feelings about this, my own reservations. Personally, I really like having a vibrant economy in action RPGs. For me, a lot of the excitement is knowing that when I find something of value that I don't want to use, I can sell that to someone else. And that whole interaction of trading with someone, haggling, coming up with a price, and finding an item for someone else that's going to help someone else is very rewarding for me personally. However, Blizzard don't feel like that's a part of what they envisioned for Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls at least. And that's just a different direction for the game. Not one that I personally like all that much, but I can definitely see how they're sort of structuring the game around that, and I still think it's probably going to be a lot of fun in its own right. But what this essentially means is that drop rates and in-game systems, essentially, have to reflect the removal of trading. So the removal of the auction house alone made items much harder to get, and they would have to change that. But also account-bounding items, meaning that you can't trade your friends for specific legendaries, also means that the game has to give you ways of getting those specific legendaries. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we move throughout the rest of this video. So, the reason you have to make changes, like the reason they can't just leave the game as it is and suddenly remove the auction house and account bind items, is that if you do that, players won't feel satisfying progression in their characters. If we're farming now in vanilla on the live servers, we're going to slowly, accrue gold, we're going to sell some items on the auction house, and we're going to get that progression towards new items. It's still satisfying in its own right. Something that a lot of players didn't like was the auction house, but there was still some form of character progression going on there at a decent sort of pace, which had been balanced over the course of a year. So now there's this move to a system of gearing for alternative characters and builds, and this is kind of the theme of Reaper of Souls, what they want to achieve with the account binding of items and some of the different drop rates and systems and other changes they're making. So no trading essentially means that Diablo is seeing a big shift towards in the way that you actually use items that you find. So if you find a good item that you can use, then you use it. Pretty simple stuff, that's always been the case, and they want this to be more the case in Reaper of Souls. And this is the big one that people get really excited about with Reaper of Souls, and certainly after playing a fair bit of the beta myself, it's one that I find pretty satisfying and exciting too. The fact that you're actually finding your own upgrades happens a lot more in Reaper of Souls, and that's all well and good. Secondly, this is the second instance that can happen. If you find a good item for your class, but not one for your skill build that you're currently using, so maybe you're playing a Frozen Orb Wizard and you find something for a Fire Wizard, then you keep it aside for your other build, that other build. Maybe it's an item that enables another build, or maybe it's an item that's just really well suited to a build you're not playing now. Maybe you put that in your stash when you want to play that other build or to create that other build. And then thirdly, if you find a good item for another class than the one you're playing now, then you stash it for that other class. If you don't have that other class, you level up that other class. This is the idea. This is, what Blizzard sort of sees as happening in Reaper of Souls with the account binding of items. So here's my question though: what happens when you don't want to play another build or class? If you're having a blast with Frozen Orb Wizards, you're not interested in Fire Element Wizards, then that item has no value besides its vendoring or besides its salvaging value, which is kind of sad that you can't then trade that to someone else because it's account bound. And same deal if you find something for another class that you don't want to play. You're all about the Demon Hunter, maybe you play a little bit of Wizard on the side, maybe even play a little bit of Witch Doctor, but you hate playing Barb, and you find a sick Barb Legendary. You know this item is amazing, but you don't want to play Barb, no matter how amazing that item is. You can't sell that item to any other Barb. So this is kind of my issue with the account binding of items, essentially. But it's a trade-off in the end. It's a trade-off. We're getting more of that us finding items we can use, but getting less of that sort of flexibility in how much we can sort of trade things around. And the game is sort of encouraging us more to play every build and every class, which should give the game a fair amount of longevity within its current constraints. So, with that sort of in mind, let's move forwards how they're dealing with the fact that although there's no trading going on, so if you want a specific legendary for your build or for your class and you just haven't got it yet, how do you go about getting it? So they recently added in gambling for legendaries. Now the gambling through blood shards system was in the game, but it wasn't awarding you legendaries on the beta for a while there, but they've added that in now. So they've recently essentially added a chance to obtain legendary items by gambling blood shards on unidentified items. Now, although the chance of getting legendary is relatively small, it allows you to always have some focus on a particular slot, and this is really important. It gives you some control over a portion of the items that are essentially dropping for you, that you're essentially having access to. So this means if you need a specific legendary helmet, maybe you need a Natalia's helmet or something like that, or a Mempo of Twilight, or whatever is the new popular helmet in the Reaper of Souls beta or in the Reaper of Souls live, then you just keep gambling on unidentified helmets. And this means that, maybe you gamble like 20 unidentified helmets every couple hours, then that means, you're getting 20 more specific chances at that legendary helmet than you would otherwise be getting. And this is sort of a necessary addition with the removal of the auction house and trading to sort of have some amount of control. Now, Travis Day said that they don't want gambling to be the primary way of obtaining these items, though. So in a recent change, they've actually reduced the amount of legendaries that you get from gambling and increased the amount of legendaries that actually drop. But we'll talk about that a bit more in the future, I think. So, new legendary drop insurance. This is one you guys might find pretty exciting, and I was pretty interested and excited when I first heard about it as well, because I had no idea this existed. No one had no idea this existed, but it's really, really cool. So, Travis Day announced that in Reaper of Souls there is a hidden system that detects when players have gone an unusually large amount of time without finding a legendary drop. And it essentially increases the drop rate temporarily to compensate. So the idea is if you go for a very long stretch of time, you're having very bad RNG for a while, then the RNG will start to tip in your favor. And it'll just do that until you get that legendary, until you're sort of back on track with what they said to be, what Blizzard wants to be the average amount of time you're spending between getting legendaries, essentially. Now, this isn't going to restrict you from getting legendary drops, but it's going to stop you from having really bad and unlucky runs of RNG, essentially. So he said that players are claiming to have gone 10 hours without finding a legendary on the beta Reaper of Souls servers. Now, he said that these people are, they're claiming this, but they're either exaggerating or experiencing a bug, which is somewhat unlikely, he said. They're experiencing a bug or they're exaggerating. And because the target number of legendaries essentially is one legendary every 2 hours. So if you go too far above that, like 10 hours, then the system starts to kick in. He actually said it's impossible to go 10 hours of farming without a legendary drop in Reaper of Souls. This is something you guys will probably be cheering for to hear. It's pretty harsh when you're on a really bad streak of luck, and that can continue for a very long time. It's very disheartening. So that actually just can't happen in Reaper of Souls. The system will eventually, maybe you'll go 3, maybe even 4 hours, but then it'll start to make it very, very, very likely that a legendary drops. You'd have to be extremely unlucky to even go through that, and 10 hours is essentially impossible. So, how does this affect the way you actually play Reaper of Souls? Because that's the main thing. What do we care about itemization and drop price unless we're thinking about it in terms of how it actually affects us? So just today, as I mentioned before, Travis announced that they were reducing the amount of legendaries produced by gambling, and they doubled the drop rate of legendaries from Killing Thins. Jay Wilson doubled it. Actually, this time Travis Day doubled it. But this is essentially in response to people on the beta servers only farming blood shards. So they were playing in specific ways and doing sort of like weird stuff like splitting up their parties and stuff just to farm the maximum number of blood shards per hour so that they could gamble. Because this was the best way to sort of get legendaries and try and get the best legendaries. Now, you know, this is sort of counterintuitive to what they want. Travis has actually said that rifts are supposed to be the most rewarding thing you can do. The bounty system is essentially there to give you a way to work for the rift keys, and then the rifts give you a huge burst of loot when you actually do them. So they're trickier to get into, but when you actually get into, you try and make the most of them, you try and farm as much of them as possible, and you benefit a lot from doing so. Now, gambling is supposed to be a supplementary thing to this. It's supposed to allow you to just have an additional minor focus on finding a specific legendary, but it's not meant to be the main focus. So they want you to be getting as many of these legendaries as possible from the actual playing the actual game and not from sitting there playing a slot machine essentially. But personally, I really like the addition of the gambling system. I think it's a really nice addition to the game. Most people, I'm pretty sure, are pretty psyched about that, but I certainly agree we don't want to have to I don't want to feel compelled to only do something that's going to farm me into farming the gambling system essentially and just rolling stuff over and over again in the gambling system. I like the idea that rifts are the main focus, because to do rifts you need to do bounties, you need to do a variety of different things in order to do rifts, and that means we're going to see a lot more of the game on average while still being efficient. So that's really cool. Then, how do I feel about the rest of this though? So I sort of mentioned overall that I'm not a big fan of the account binding of items. I like trading in action RPGs, so that's a bit of a shame. However, I really like, within this theming, this account binding theming, and the direction they're headed with Diablo 3, I really like what they're doing with it. So, as I said, the way of designing these rifts, the way of designing bounties that feed into rifts, and then the addition of gambling on top of that to give you a chance of getting their specific legendaries. I really like how they've gone about doing all of this. So within a setting of sort of being a little bit disappointed about the lack of trading, I'm very happy with what they're doing within that setting. So it's pretty interesting. I'm sort of keen to see where they take this idea, because I can definitely see this theming that they're trying to forge their own sort of mini ARPG genre that's sort of like this fast-paced, sort of MMO-y experience that's more about playing a variety of different characters and builds, finding a sick item, then maybe changing your build all of a sudden, and just sort of having fun stomping monsters with it. I feel like it's going to be a significantly different game to other action RPGs I play, which is actually, I think, in the end, a pretty good thing, because it'll be nice to have the more traditional ARPG experience through something like Path of Exile, Diablo 2, or even Torchlight, and then to be able to go to Diablo 3 and have this sort of, newer sort of action RPG experience that plays a little bit differently, but sort of still has some of those core features that keep us really engaged. So, overall, yeah, I kind of like what they're doing within this sort of theme of account binding items. But I'm really keen to hear how you guys feel about it. How do you feel about the account binding of items, the current sort of system of how they're arranging the drop rates, and the addition of the gambling system as well? How do you feel about that? Anyway, that's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.